I guess, in relation to the terrible news that we had with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And there's been debate going on now on both social media and in person, just people asking. A lot of people love Charlie. He was a great conservative and so forth, but they don't know. As Catholics, how to, so I guess this the debate right now is, was he a Catholic or was he not? And some people are saying, well, he might have been a catechumen, he might have not been,
Hmm.
he's an evangelical,
Yeah.
etc. So that sets it up. But then the question becomes, apparently in tradition, if you um die as a non-Catholic, you can't have a mass offered.
Hmm.
You can't offer mass for non-Catholics, but only while they're living for their conversion. So, what is if you can just kind of help with some of this debate that's going on. Can we offer a mass for Charlie Kirk? Can we not? What can we do in this case, in this tragic thing, and offering prayers and doing what we can as Catholics?
Yes. So I have friends who are 1958 Sedevacantists. Other groups of 58 Sedevacantists only present certain parts of the faith. I'll give you one example. I won't name their name because I want them to come after me, but they have a whole thing on why Catholics, you can't offer a public mass for, well, here's what they say. You can't offer a mass for a deceased non-Catholic. And they quote the 1903 Catholic Encyclopedia, pretty solid document, right? And so I went and looked at that because, again, they claim 1903 Catholic Encyclopedia says you cannot offer a mass for a deceased non-Catholic. There's this specific group of 58 studies. They're kind of funny. They're always in error through what they leave out, not what they actually present. So here's what they left out of that. The 1903 Catholic Encyclopedia does, in fact, say you can't offer a public mass for a deceased non-Catholic, but you can offer private masses for deceased non-Catholics. And so the altar behind me, I've already offered a couple masses for Charlie Kirk. As I put on Substack, I can't declare him a martyr, so I'm still obliged to pray for him. But because he never formally entered the church, you really can't do, like, according to the traditional rules, a public mass for a fallen non-Catholic. But I'm a hermit. I live alone. And according to the old school rules, I can offer private masses for him. And so obviously, if God saw him as a martyr and he went straight to heaven, God's going to redirect those prayers of my mass there. If somehow he's not saved, I don't think that's the case. If somehow he's not saved, my prayers are still going to get redirected to people in purgatory.
Hmm.
So that's kind of one of those things where I'm really glad you asked the question because um, there's a lot of information out there, and it often takes some digging past the initial traditional presentation. Because again, the traditional presentation is you can't offer mass for a non-Catholic who died. And again, the old school rules is that is the case for public masses, but there is some leeway on private
On
masses.
private masses. No, that's good. That's really good to hear. So if Catholics want to ask their local priest, can you offer a mass? They could do
Yeah,
it privately, and there's
I
no
think
there's no
so.
problem.
Yeah, I think so. Hmm.
Okay, no,
And then
good.
there's, yeah, I mean, I think one of the important things to realize is I put this on Substack that the Catholic Church traditionally considered her catechumens to be one of her own. Now, the pushback I got from a lot of traditionalists was, but he hadn't entered RCIA. And what I want to say to those traditionalists is, but do you really believe in RCIA? Like, do you really think that the real test of if you're a catechumen is if you go to Mrs. Van's liberal class in the basement eating cookies and learning about social justice? Like, you have a guy quoting scripture, um, defending the rights of Mary, sounding more Catholic, sorry to say it, than 99.9% of the bishops of the United States. And you're going to say, unless you're in union with the bishops who you sound a lot more Catholic than, then you can't be saved. So this really brings into questions of, like, what do you mean by the Catholic Church, right? Do you have to be in union with the very bishops that publicly declare all the time that Protestants are saved? Which I disagree with. I'm not saying those bishops are right, but you see how it's kind of like a weird cyclical thing that neither the Recognize and Resist or the 58 Settings have fully figured out, because it's like the Recognize and Resist non-Setties out there who are saying Charlie Kirk's in hell because he didn't entered formally the Catholic Church before he died, they're really saying he didn't unify with a Pachamama worshiping and his predecessor, the next guy in line with him, and the U.S. bishops who are totally fine with their Catholics double dipping on Sundays, going to a mega church and Holy Mass. So I don't understand personally how you have to say Charlie Kirk had to be in union with the local bishop who really doesn't believe in hell. Let's just be very honest.
It doesn't
I
believe
don't
in
think
hate
there's a single
or
ordinary in the United States that believes anyone goes to hell. And Charlie Kirk really believed people went to hell. So you're going to have some listeners not very happy at my next sentence, but he was more Catholic than 99% of the Catholics out there. Because
yeah,
I'll be honest, modernism is actually a worse heresy than Eastern Orthodoxy. It's a worse heresy than Protestantism. And now when I say modernism, most people think, oh, yeah, James Martin's really bad. No, no, no. I'm actually more extreme than your average traditionalist. I think 99% of the Catholics in this country are actually modernists. So if Charlie Kirk's not saved for not being a Catholic, then really nobody going to the Novus Ordo is going to be saved either. So you got to be pretty careful of the conclusions you come to on this stuff.
yeah. But I think it's true. I think it's really it's a good point you're making because what does being in union with the church or in union with the faith or in communion with Christ really?
Yeah.
I mean, we have lots of debate going on with that, like the SSPX are not in communion with the church or whatever. You know, this
Hmm.
group isn't, that group isn't, or
That's
that
right.
priest isn't. Even independent priests get picked on. You know, they're not in communion with the church. They're not under a bishop,
Yeah.
so forth. But one person I says, "Oh, it goes back to what St. Paul says, where we have to be of one heart, one mind, one
Yeah.
baptism, you know, one faith." And what does that look like? It looks like, you know, holding faithful to the dogmas and the doctrines of the church that have always been, always
Yeah.
were, and were taught
That's right.
everywhere, and holding
And
to
and
that.
and even I've written a lot against moral theology errors that just overemphasize reduced culpability, but we as traditionalists do believe in a little bit of reduced culpability. And Dr. Maz has proven, I went looking through Charlie Kirk's old tweets even before I knew you were going to ask me this question today. And Charlie Kirk wanted to enter the Catholic Church, but he saw in Francis such a Marxist, he couldn't do it. When I heard Dr. Mazza say that on Ann Barnhart's podcast just 2 days ago, I decided this morning, again, before you even had me on to talk about this, I went looking through Charlie Kirk's tweets, and it's true. He was highlighting, he was trying to stay very respectful of the Catholics he could, but he couldn't enter because he saw in him a Marxist. And boy, regardless of where you find that man's validity on the chair of Peter, you have to grant some slack to Charlie Kirk, a very Bible believing Christian who that has to be some cause for reduced culpability. If looking at a universalist Unitarian Pachamama worshiper, you can't enter that church unless you're in union with a Pachamama worshiper, you're not saved. That cannot be how the God of divine revelation functions. I'm not saying I know he's absolutely in heaven, but there's holes in a lot of traditional arguments out there right now, and I just don't buy it. Unless Charlie Kirk died in union with two open border popes, he can't be saved as he, you know, died for defending the truth. You
Yeah.
know, the
Yeah,
measure, and
it's
I'll
sad,
just,
the
yeah, go ahead.
situation.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's sad the situation that we're in. It's like a it has to be like a miracle, and it really is because we've had a catechumen just recently this past year join the church, and we consider it a huge miracle because they look at the Pope and they're like, "Yeah." I tell my kids in class, I said, "We're not Catholic because of the Pope. You know, he's supposed to be representing Christ, supposed to be defending the doctrine of the church, but when he's not, you know, and he's gone off the rails, as some we don't follow that way. We continue to just remain faithful, but." And that's what being communion really means. It doesn't mean you know have to follow the Pachamama way, you know, etc. It's really a miracle if someone does enter the church today. I just it's heartbreaking to see how much one. I mean, even just as Catholics, how do we hold on? You know, seeing you know that the hierarchy is and such. But Our Lady has warned us that that would happen.
Exactly. Exactly. And like you look at, there were some Eastern Orthodox metropolitans, even over the last 50 years, who wanted to become Catholic in the Vatican. I think it was in the 1980s, maybe the 1990s also. So we're even talking prior to 2013, told them, don't become Catholic. They want to become Eastern Catholics. And I don't know if it was a patriarch or an Eastern Orthodox bishop, and they were told by the Vatican, don't convert because that's going to harm ecumenical relations. So the
I
really,
reading
right?
the
So the really tough recognize and resist people out there who say, well, Eastern Orthodox or schismatic, they're gonna go to hell. It's like, so they're gonna go to hell for obeying the very Vatican they have to be in union with by obeying them who tells them to stay out of the Catholic Church. That doesn't make any sense, right? So again, I'm not saying they're saved because times are confusing, but I am saying there's got to be major, major levels of reduced culpability in God's mercy if you have an Eastern Orthodox patriarch wanting to become Catholic and the Vatican itself tells him, no, 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 you stay Eastern Orthodox because that's going to hurt Eastern Orthodox relations. That
right.
is not us teaching the classic teaching of extra ecclesia nulla salus, right? And then in that case, maybe the 58 sedes are right. But then in that case, was Charlie Kirk, did he go to hell for not being in union with a church totally invisible, a church that has absolutely no visibility? Well, that also doesn't describe a
Right.
merciful God either. So everyone who thinks they have a really good answer, from like the tough guy recognizing resistors to the 58 sedes, don't have it. And I don't claim I have it either. That's where I'm just remembering the measure with which you measure is going to be measured unto you. And Charlie Kirk was more Catholic than 99% of the Catholics I know. So, if he's not saved, I better go live in a cave on one potato a day.